Hello. Your mic is off, David.
My big intro had just gone there.
Hi. That's it. Hi, everybody. I'm here.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Yes. Rabbi, how are you?
Baruch Hashem, very well. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Yeah, not too bad at all.
Are you feeling festive?
I am always feeling festive, but this week all the more so. So yeah, very interesting topic tonight because the festive period historically hasn't always been such a happy, smiley period of time. And we're going to have a look at the sort of history and the origins of this. Let me ask you something. I mean, you probably grew up you did grow up in Austria. Is Christmas and the festive sort of season, is it celebrated differently to how you experience it over here?
So the honest truth is, I was too young to really notice it when I was in Vienna. I was up to I lived there till I was almost 14. So I remember, oh, hi, Sheila. I remember we used to go away skiing. So the festive season was skiing season always. That was, so here might be something else. I don't know if here it becomes shopping season. But in Austria, I don't know, is it like that in Germany? You could ask your wife if she grew up the same way. But in Austria, come the winter holidays, you get 2 weeks off from the 24th to the 7th. And lots of people, or most people, go skiing during that time.
Yeah,
so actually, it's good.
It's a break, but I think also the actual. So maybe we'll start with this. Actually, it's a very good point. The dates upon which Christmas particularly is celebrated differs from country to country. Here in the UK and in America, it's on the 25th of December. I think in Europe, in Poland, it's as early as the 23rd of December at some point, and in Germany as well on the 24th, if I understood correctly.
Yeah, so my mother reminded me actually when I spoke to her, she says everybody gets together on the 24th. I'm like, no, they get together on the 25th. Because I was telling her about the fact that we were allowed to have guests on the 25th. And she goes, but who has people over on the 25th? I said, what do you mean? Everybody has people over on the 25th. And she's like, no, it's just the 24th. I said, so I guess the big meal over there is on the 24th. They must drink less in Austria also at the meal because they got the midnight mass on the 24th going into the 25th. So I can't imagine midnight mass looking like what this year Friday night will look like on Purim. You ever had a Friday Purim?
Never experienced. I don't think I have. No.
Yeah, I have Friday Purim. I think we had about 5-6 years ago. We had a Friday Purim. So when you have Friday Purim and people have the Purim Suda, and then you go from that straight into Shabbos, it's always interesting to see what shul looks like when people walk in all states of inebriation. Not so much in the shrubberies, but when I remember about 10, 12 years ago when we had it in Beis Mordechai, it was quite an interesting Friday night davening. Very, very different.
I bet. So to give it a bit of background, I think everybody universally agrees that although Christmas is meant to signify the birth of Jesus, effectively, the poiskim, as it were, and this is all kinds of different interpretations. They all very much differ on the actual date of when it was, but almost universally all agree that it was not in December.
Correct.
And
so, I listened to a shir today. I don't know if you heard the shir. Did you listen to the shir? I should really put up the. I'm going to try to find the.
Is it the Kellerman one?
The Rabbi Kellerman one. Is that the one?
Yeah, I'm going to put a link up to that in a second. Yeah,
I think you should put a link up to that because anybody who wants to hear an entire shir, I didn't take notes on it. I should have sat down and taken notes. But that's a pretty impressive shir, that one.
It is. It's very interesting the way that he sort of takes you through the historical background to this festival, and just charts its changing history over the years. So it starts off, I think, as a pagan festival many years ago, called Saturnalia, which which basically I think ran from the 17th of December to the 25th of December.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a period of time where Purim is quite an apt comparison, if you like, because it was a time where everything was upside down.
Yeah, but I think it was worse than that, because what he says is that the Roman courts were closed. So first of all, it was a pagan festival, and the Roman courts were closed. So as the Roman courts were closed, you couldn't get done for anything. So anything went, and anything was, I don't know if it was legal, but you wouldn't get punished for it. And so that makes for a real balagan and a mess. If everybody sort of comes together and decides for 7-8 days. I mean, we had the riots. Can't remember how long ago they were. Remember, we had the riots in Manchester city centre.
I remember that well. Yeah.
And you saw what happened with the Black Lives Matter riots that happened in America, and everything went crazy in New York, and people were breaking down shops, et cetera, et cetera. It was really something to see that, when we go into anarchy, it's really, really difficult. And to imagine in the olden days when things went into anarchy, I think things got a lot more violent then than they ever got nowadays. So yes, we had that 7-day festival culminating with the 25th of December.
And on that day, the 25th of December, that was celebrated by, again, usually a lot of drinking. And there was a whole role reversal between masters and servants and everything else. But in many cases, resulted in violence for the local Jewish population.
Absolutely.
And this is a tradition that carries forward not just in Roman times, but it then lasts all the way through until very recent history, when you're talking about the pogroms in Poland and parts of Russia. That any sort of festival that involved a lot of inebriation was an excuse to then go out and wrought violence on a local Jewish population, who, of course, ultimately historically was blamed for the death of Jesus. So it's two things that are very much juxtaposed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the other thing that happened, and this happened twice a year. I think it happened on Christmas, but it also happened Easter time. That there was the priests used to rile up their congregations against the Jews. So the deicide, as it's called, the allegation of killing their God, there it is, simple2remember.com. You got it? Right?
Yep.
So the allegations of deicide, of the Jewish people having killed their God, it's been an allegation that's been going on for a very, very long time. It's actually interesting, because if you speak to scholars of the time and they read about this whole idea of Pontius Pilate and him putting Jesus to death, the way it's portrayed in the Gospels is very much that Pontius Pilate had no issue whatsoever with this fellow called Jesus, but at the behest of the bloodthirsty Jews, they then went ahead and they killed Jesus. Whereas many people say that story doesn't even make any sense, because he was stirring up trouble. He was saying or claiming that he's the new king. And when you're the man in charge over there he was the, what's it called? Well, he was the guy from Rome. He was sent by Rome. Another word with P, I can't remember now. But he was the guy sent from Rome that was in charge of the Jewish people in the land of Israel during that period, the period that he lived. When you had somebody come forward and say, I've become the new king, if you're the guy in charge there, you just want to make very, very clear, I'm in charge, I'm the king, and not you. And so therefore, plus, on top of it, crucifixion was not a Jewish form of death. We have other forms of death, but crucifixion is not a Jewish form of death. It's really it was a Roman way of killing people. And so to say that it was the Jewish people that did this, in and of itself, has been one of these lies that have been perpetuated that has really caused us untold suffering over the years.
And so this tradition of pogroms, particularly, I mean, you're probably taught this in Europe, because that history is more, all the more pertinent over there. But Christmas and New Year's Eve the evening of New Year's on January the 1st, that was always a time where those Jewish villagers used to fear, didn't they? And so so that changed the way.
So, I'll tell you an interesting one. So much so, there's actually a halacha. I think I spoke about this last week. I'm not sure if I spoke about it in shul, but there's a halacha that says you shouldn't learn on what's known as Nittelnacht. Nittelnacht is the night of the 24th, from between the 24th and the 25th. And there are in halacha some people that take this very seriously and say they don't learn, which is when you get all these people playing chess, famous rabbanim playing chess and playing cards and doing all sorts of things. However, in halacha, there are also those that say, like Chassam Sofer writes, that actually the reason why people didn't learn, or I think, no, it wasn't Chassam Sofer. Chassam Sofer says something else. But one of the other Mefarshim writes that the reason why people didn't learn on the night of the 24th to the 25th, because nobody wanted to go to the Beis Medrash, because being out of your house was already inherently dangerous. You just didn't want to be seen outside the house, which is why he said, it's not that you're not supposed to learn, but nobody learned publicly because it was just too dangerous to be out there and to be in a Beis Medrash. Who knows what would happen to you?
And there are a whole load of halachas, or shall we say traditions, that are meant to take place on Nittelnacht. Certain things you are meant to do, you're not meant to do, but it's all to do with sort of optimum safety, really, isn't it? Common sense.
Well, some of it. Are you talking about from the Jewish standpoint?
Yeah, from the Jewish perspective, yeah.
So, I mean, it's only the learning. That was the only one that was that. Although there are others that say, and this is the interesting thing, actually, because if historically speaking, there is no real evidence to say that Jesus was born on the 25th or the night of the 24th or 25th of December, then some say you shouldn't learn on that night because the powers, the kochas atum, and the powers of impurity are so strong on that evening that they would sort of overpower the goodness, and any learning that you did would actually, the power of that or the zechus, the merit of that would make its way into the negative side, or the forces of dark, forces of evil, would not actually be correct, because the forces of evil shouldn't be that strong on that night because he wasn't really born then. Interestingly enough, I think amongst the Hasidim, they're very, very strong about this. Again, Hasidim very much into the deeper mystical side of things, which is why they take this quite seriously.
They're very, very interesting. So we must obviously make it very clear that although we're talking about this subject, we're handling it as sensitively as possible. And if there are is anybody that does celebrate Christmas, or anybody that happens to be Christian that does stumble across this broadcast or is listening tonight, the intention is not in any way to belittle it or to take away from the celebration. It's really to have a look at in a historical perspective, because the holiday that is celebrated now and that we know as the modern form of Christmas is a lot different to how it would have been back in those days. And in fact, really, it's only recent history that has changed Christmas for good, pretty much, in terms of how the Western world has this vision of Christmas. And there's a phenomena known as religious synthesis, which basically it takes two parts of different religions or ideologies, and it tries to combine them so that you are talking to the same combined audience. So, for instance, when Christianity was trying to get off the ground, one of the challenges that Christianity had was how to encompass pagan rituals and pagan traditions into into Christian tradition, and to make that part of Christmas, which changed it forever, because they took everything from Saturnalia and combined it together with this story of the birth of Jesus. But modern history is what changes it. It's fascinating to me, is what changes it the most is actually Coca-Cola.
Yeah, I love that. I love that bit that he says over there. Whatever his name is.
Yeah, I mean, he talks about the fact that at some point in the 1900s, Coca-Cola was a very popular drink, but started to run out of popularity because one of its active ingredients back in those days was actually cocaine.
Coca.
Yeah, and they had to stop using that ingredient, and they replaced it with a very poor substitute, which is caffeine, which doesn't quite hit the spot, I'm told. But in an effort to really reach out and to gain that audience, Coca-Cola commissioned these drawings of what we now know as Santa Claus. So the jolly old Santa with the white beard and the big red boy that he always looks very happy and contented, a very jolly man that delivers presents to kids that have been good. This is a very, very recent phenomena, pretty much didn't exist before that time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I'll tell you a funny story that happened to us. It's a true story. We had a driver once take us to Borough Park. We had to do something. My mother and I, we were taking care of some stuff in Borough Park. And this was actually an African American. I think he was an Indian American. So he'd never been to Borough Park before in his life. And he's driving around and he just stopped at a red traffic light and he turns around and he goes, "My goodness, look at the guy across over there." He's pointing to one Hasidic guy. He goes, "That guy would make the most perfect Santa Claus ever." You know? And I thought that was very funny. We had a good laugh about it. And we finally got to the place where he dropped us off and he turns around and he goes, "I don't know what this place is, but this is like Santa Claus heaven. Like every third guy I drive past here looks like another Santa Claus. Is this where they all live? Like where is this place?" Like not just Brooklyn full of Hasidim. You think of these jolly big people with the long white beards, there you go. So look, they look slightly Jewish, but I mean, again, as was said on that cheer, that Santa Claus, Saint Nicholas, lived in Turkey and then was buried in Italy. So he didn't look anything like that Santa Claus. Then you have to add to that the fact that how did he get to the North Pole? How did it end up being red? So the red is Coca-Cola, the reindeers, all that is that synthesis that you spoke about. It's actually interesting to go back to that synthesis when you talk about early Christianity. When you speak about that synthesis, really the first people that they wanted to create a synthesis with, and the most important people to have created a synthesis with, was actually the Jewish people. And so what they were trying to do is the early Christians were trying to say, we keep the Torah, plus we keep one extra mitzvah, which is believe in Jesus being the Messiah. That's it. That's all there was. But the early Christians were actually quite religious. And it's only at a later point in time, there are two versions of what happens in this story. There's the conspiracy theory. Whether it's true or not, you'll never know. But there is a conspiracy theory that says that when Paul comes around at a later point and says Jesus has fulfilled all of the law for us because the law is impossible to fulfill. I mean, so this is the Christian theology. The law is impossible for man to fulfill. God gave the Jewish people a law. They didn't fulfill it. It was impossible for them to fulfill. And there's only one man that did it for them. Jesus did it for them. And now that he has fulfilled the law, it is not incumbent upon them anymore for anyone to fulfill the law. And now we have a New Testament that has a whole different line of laws, etc., etc. And many of the laws that they kept didn't need to be kept anymore. Some actually say that was somebody planted by the Sanhedrin or by the Beth Din was planted into Christianity to create this split. Because if you read in the Gemara, for example, and read in the Mishnah says, how would you know a Christian when he was davening for the Amud? How would you know that a Christian was a Chazan? So we didn't want to have Christians davening as Chazanim because they weren't considered believers as far as we were concerned. But they still considered themselves part of the community. So, for example, the Mishnah says if they didn't say the bracha v'lam al shinim to those who are the slanderers, etc., which refer to the early Christians, it was a bracha against the early Christians that was created. And if a person who was davening for the Amud would not be willing to say the bracha v'lam al shinim against the Christians, we would assume that he was a closet Christian, so to speak, and they would get rid of him. However, I mean, nowadays, you'd never have any closet Christians around the Jews. You wouldn't have any closet Christians trying to daven Shemona Esrei because they have a very, very different way of doing things. And so this split in the church away from the law was because they were totally unsuccessful with bringing the Jewish people in. And a lot of the hatred, historically speaking, a lot of people say a lot of the hatred against the Jewish people comes from that, in the fact that their own people, or the people that they were hoping they were going to back them up the most, actually rejected them. And in that rejection, they went back and rejected the Jewish people as well. And the Jews ended up with a lot of tsaros on the back of that.
So in that share that we posted a link to earlier, Rabbi Kellerman reaches what I consider to be a very extreme conclusion, because he basically says, look, because the roots of this tradition, however nice it looks today, because today Christmas is served up as, well, let's talk about that for a second, because one of the things you sent me a list of talking points across earlier this week. One of the things that you raised was, has Christmas become, or has the festive period become too commercialized? And the fact that it could so quickly become changed into a narrative to sell more Coca-Cola effectively, which has lasted all the way till today, shows you how much commercialization of holidays in general in this modern age has taken place.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we could even say that in Jewish Yom Tovim, things have become a lot more commercialized as well. Think about what your grandparents bought for Pesach, and think about what your wife or my wife sent you to the shop for Pesach. And I can guarantee you that my list was probably 3 or 4 times as long as that of my grandparents. So I say, well, they didn't have all this stuff. Yeah, but you know what? We've commercialized it. We've commercialized a lot of things. We've created this massive Jewish wine industry that didn't exist. And then you say, it's for Shabbos, it's for Kiddush, it's to celebrate Chasnas and Simchas. It's a Jewish wine industry. I mean, they're not, yes, that's what you'll use it for. But let's call a spade a spade. And so we've also commercialized things. But the sad thing is, especially if you listen to Martin Lewis, he used to speak about this all the time. And it's funny that you had somebody Jewish giving everybody non-Jewish advice on how to go ahead and how to make Christmas affordable. But
yeah.
you'd always, and you have him always at the beginning of the program saying, I'm not buying anything for my kids. If anyone else for Christmas, I'm Jewish. Don't worry about it. But if you are saving up, and basically the fact is that people are going into tremendous amount of debt for Christmas. People are buying presents that they can't afford. People are taking out credit card loans and payday loans and all sorts of things. And people are saying they have to buy their children the most ridiculous, crazy, expensive things. I remember somebody once said to me they were buying their kid a t-shirt that was 75 or 80 pounds, and that was only one of the presents. And I'm like, why does a kid need a 75-pound t-shirt? I mean, it's a t-shirt, for goodness sake. Who spends 75 pounds on a t-shirt? But, that was that, and there was the Xbox, and there was the this, and there was the that. And then people come to school, and they have to start comparing prizes. So you come to school, and somebody says, you only got an Xbox. I got 2 iPads. Oh, and then you start feeling no good. So they've taken it, and it's turned into, well, all the sales are then. Everybody, the same has happened, by the way, to Thanksgiving in America. Black Friday has become, it's the day after Thanksgiving.
Here's a great question from Clive Moss Barkley. If Xmas is no longer a religious festival, should it be celebrated by people of all faiths, including us?
So I would say I celebrated it this year by having guests at my house, which was the only time it was legal for the last 9 or 10 months to have guests. So we actually had guests. But I wouldn't say that I was celebrating Christmas. So it's an interesting question, Clive. And that's really what you were getting to before about what Rabbi Kellerman was saying about people. Is it right or is it wrong for us to be looking at Christmas in a positive way? And he had a very negative view of Christmas because he said, if Christmas for all those years has been such a terrible day for the Jews, a day that has caused such havoc and has made such trouble for the Jewish communities all around the world, how could we celebrate it now? And he compared it, again, this is the extreme comparison, and not everybody probably would agree with this conclusion, but he compared it, he says the 20th of April is a day where the neo-Nazis around Europe celebrate Hitler's birthday. And so they have a special day, they call that, I don't know if they call it Hitler Day or neo-Nazi, whatever they're going to call it. But they have a special day where they celebrate Hitler's birthday. He says, if you could travel into the distant future, 200 years down the line, and Hitler Day became a commercialized thing, and everybody buys little puppets of the guy with a mustache, and everybody wears SS outfits, et cetera, and it's become like a really fun time for everyone, and the neo-Nazi side of it went away, you still wouldn't be excited to find your great-great-grandchildren celebrating Hitler Day, knowing what Hitler had done to our people. And I think the same thing is what he's saying over there. Even though it's not a religious festival anymore, should it be? It shouldn't be something we're celebrating. I mean, what I would say to Clive is, and this is an interesting point, I remember people on the radio saying, I'm sure they said it on TV as well, but I just don't watch TV. Okay. Oh, interesting. All right, Ian, if that's
I think what Ian says is, I think the Madam President sends our president out to IKEA on the Boxing Day sales. I think that's
okay. Why not? So, gosh, I lost my train of thought now.
Well, maybe we'll put you back on that train of thought. If I just go back to that, to me, although you're not necessarily, I find Rabbi Kellerman's conclusion a little bit extreme, and I choose to take comfort in the fact that this consumerism that Jane talks about, and the commercialization that we've touched on, and the industry that is now behind Christmas has basically changed Christmas as we know it into a time of the year where the sort of precepts of goodwill, charity, giving to friends and to relatives, etc., and this whole thing of peace on earth and goodwill to all men has replaced this age-old rhetoric of violence and chaos. To me, it's something. It's a byproduct that I can live with. I will take this consumerist version of Christmas any day over the pogroms for sure.
Oh, absolutely.
A million times.
Are you going to be celebrating that? So now I remember what I was going to say. As they said on the radios and on television, they said, "Well, why are we celebrating Christmas now? Let's celebrate it in June." Right? In June will be past. Most of us will have had the injections already. We can give the presents in June. We can get together with our families in June. We can go to the beach in June instead of celebrating a white Christmas. We'll celebrate a yellow Christmas because you go to the beaches. I don't know, call whatever you want to. But in truth, especially as a religious person, hearing that kind of argument really, really irks me. Because imagine if I said to you, you know what, Rosh Hashanah was really dangerous this year because of COVID. Let's do Rosh Hashanah in May.
Yeah.
You can't do Rosh Hashanah in May. Rosh Hashanah is when Rosh Hashanah is. If it's too dangerous to get together, fine. So it's too dangerous to get together. I take that on board. And if it was too dangerous for us to have come together on Rosh Hashanah, we would have shut the shul, even though it was Rosh Hashanah. Baruch Hashem, we were able to daven all the way through from the beginning of Elul till the end of Rosh Hashanah. Then we had a 4-week break and we're back in shul. But if we hadn't been able to be in shul, we wouldn't have pushed up Rosh Hashanah. We would have said Rosh Hashanah happens to be Rosh Hashanah without the extra bits that you wanted to have.
Okay, I'm just reading Clive's comment as it comes in. He states that Jesus was a rebel Jew, as far as I'm aware, had nothing against the Jewish people. It is the Christian, i.e. the Roman Church, which has been the main source of 2,000 years of anti-Semitism.
That's probably true, but it's very hard to prove one way or another, because the Christian Gospels, the earliest Gospel that was written, I think, 50 CE, which is already 15, 20 years after he was died, and was written by Mark. So and Mark gives you one picture of things, and at later dates, other people give you another picture of things. And the main issue is that at a later time, at the Council of Nicaea in the 4th century CE, so they came together and they had a decision. The Roman Catholics came together and they had to make a decision. Which books become canonized and which books do not become canonized? Which books become part of their New Testament, their Tanakh, so to speak, and which books get pushed out as non-canonized books? So it's actually interesting to note that the people that put together this, the New Testament for the Christian church were rabidly anti-Jewish and anti-Semitic. One of them being this Sylvester that he speaks about.
Yeah.
So I remember when I was in Vienna, they always used to speak about New Year as being Sylvester. Have you heard that? Did they do that in Germany?
In Germany, but also in Israel. So they would refute. Well, over the years, when they were setting up the state of Israel, they never referred to the secular New Year as New Year, because they had their Rosh Hashanah, but they would always refer to it as Sylvester.
Yeah. So that Sylvester, for example, he was a pope, or he was a very high up priest at the time of the Council of Nicaea. and he was not exactly pro-Jewish either. So that you have what Clive is saying is quite correct, but you can't really 100% say that Jesus had nothing to do with the hatred of Jews. It's hard to say because we don't have anything clearly written out by Jesus. We only have things written by his students, and some of his students did turn Jesus into a Jew-hating Jew at the end of his life. After the Jews rejected him, he did become Jew-hating. But whether those are accurate or not, or whether these are the ones that were chosen by the Council of Nicaea to include because it was very sort of convenient and fit their line of thought that they wanted to take. So they included all the Gospels that worked for them and didn't include the ones that didn't work for them. That we'll never know.
Very interesting. Jane comments that coming from a Christian upbringing, if anything, it was Easter that she found anti-Semitic rather than Xmas. Jane, if you want to expand on that, if you think it's appropriate, then please drop it into the chat. Sharon,
I can expand on that basically. I mean, Easter is the time. I understand where she's coming from. So Easter is the time where Jesus was crucified. So that came right around Pesach time. So Jesus was either crucified the day before Pesach or on Pesach. There's a bit of a contradiction between the different Gospels, which one of the days he was crucified in or not. So it was either the day before Christmas or the day before Pesach or the day of Pesach. But the Last Supper, if you ask people what the Last Supper was,
that's the Seder. Yeah.
It was the Seder, right? Except for that one, I think in John, it's not the Seder, it was the day before. But either which way. So that was the crucifixion, as we said before. If Jews were accused of the crucifixion, they were the ones that got Pontius Pilate to do it. And so therefore, around Easter time, when you look at the crucifixion and the fact that Jewish people not only didn't take on Jesus as a god, but served him up to be killed by the Roman procurator, whatever his name is. So therefore, that's why Easter was a time of a lot more anti-Semitism. And that, I think, is hard to pull out of it. Whereas I think Easter still has a less commercial side to it, and it's much more religious festival of remembering the crucifixion and then the resurrection of Jesus. That's what Easter is, in which there's a lot of anti-Semitic content. Whereas if you've sort of taken away the Saturnalia and all those other bits from Christmas and turned it into family time, peace for all, commercialized it, it loses that anti-Semitic side to it.
Yeah. So Sharon says, some of my Christian friends take their festival very seriously by going to church, but most treat it as a lovely family time to usually look forward to. And I think most people are sort of blissfully unaware of the roots of their festival, if you like.
Correct. I would say the truth is that even for us as Jews, there are plenty of people that are blissfully unaware of what the Yom Tovim are about. They have a slight idea. So for many people, Pesach is about matzah, and Pesach is about having 4 cups of wine and coming together for the Seder. But the Exodus of Egypt, which is really being commemorated by Pesach, is something that doesn't speak to them. Sukkot doesn't speak to there's lots of people that have never sat in a sukkah. Unless you come to shul and sit in somebody else in the shul sukkah. For many people in shul, probably they've never sat in a sukkah because sukkah is sort of like a non-festival for them. Whereas Pesach, because of the Seder, people still come together and have the Seder together. But for them, again, Seder has become a time of families getting together and less so a time of celebrating the Exodus of Egypt.
So it's more symbolic than anything else.
For a lot of people, it is.
Clive, again, if you want to strengthen any new organization, give them a common scapegoat for all its members to blame. We've been scapegoats for the past 2,000 years. That really is the story, isn't it? And that's the point that we keep coming back to. Yeah,
Woody Allen had this joke about the equal opportunity camp. Did you hear that one? He said, I was in an equal opportunity camp. I was beaten by people of all faiths and all creeds equally. That's what he said.
It's very, very interesting.
It's sad because it's true. The strange thing about anti-Semitism is the illogical way of things that people speak about. On the one hand, they'll say the Jews own everything, and on the other hand, say the Jews are parasites who keep on taking away everything that we have. On the one hand, the Jews have killed Iran on the end and not reject us on the other hand, we don't want them. You know, there's always this dichotomy of almost an illogical dichotomy where we, as Klein says, you're a scapegoat no matter who you are, whether you're on the left, sitting on the left, or whether you're sitting on the right, whether you're like, communist, etc., whether you're fascist, and anti-Semitism seems to work for both ends of the spectrum. And the people in the middle are very often not spared that either. We're not spared by them either.
So there are this idea of synthesis. It probably is something that goes hand in hand when we talk about things like assimilation as well, where we sort of borrow from different cultures, and by doing so, you water down your own religion. It becomes multicultural in many ways. But in America, it's a great. You see a crossover between Hanukkah and Christmas sometimes in some congregations where people will have a Christmas tree and
Hanukkah bush, they call it.
Yeah.
That's the issue is, the sad thing is, for example, they did a study. It was called the Pew Study. I'm not sure why it's called the Pew Study, if it's put out by a company called Pew or something like that, but that's what it's called. It's called the Pew Study of American Jewry. You can look it up. It's got a lot of different information. It's very telling about American Jewry. And one of the scariest and most depressing and upsetting things that this study found, for example, in America, is the following. Around December time, you are more likely to find a Christmas tree in a Jewish home than you are to find a kosher kitchen. This is American Jewry. Around Christmas time, you are more likely to find a Christmas tree than you are to find a kosher kitchen. And the reason for that, especially in America being that way, in America with the Reform and Conservative being the very strong movements, and they're not anywhere near as strong here in this country, but in America, the Reform and the Conservative more or less have 85 to 90% of the population is Reform and Conservative, of the Jewish population. And so by them, kosher isn't a thing. And many, many people, well, you got it over there.
Yeah, that's
2013. My goodness, I didn't realize it was that long ago.
Yeah.
Had you seen that one before?
So I think you referred to it in one of our earliest talks that we did. I can't remember in connection to what. I think it was to do with assimilation and Jewish education, actually, where this came up. But I
might have even said the same statistic that I just mentioned. It's that one statistic that always sticks out to me, that it's very, very frightening to think that you're more likely to find a Christmas tree in a Jewish home than you are to find a kosher kitchen. But the synthesis of that, so there are two ways that this synthesis works. The synthesis can either work because the Jewish people have assimilated, many people have married out, and therefore what they've done is they said, you know what, we have two beautiful holidays that happen in December. We have Hanukkah, which is beautiful, and we have Christmas, which is beautiful. And I'm Christian and you're Jewish, or I'm Jewish and you're Christian. So why don't we come together and celebrate both of them? And our children have the best of both worlds. They'll learn about Hanukkah and they'll learn about Christmas at the same time. And for some people, they think that that's going to give their children a very balanced view, a balanced worldview, because they're not one way or another. They have both. They have Christian holiday of Christmas, and they also have Hanukkah. The problem is that, in general, this synthesis doesn't really work very well, especially as Jews. I've seen it again and again. When we've tried to synthesize things together, in the end, you just end up with either a watered-down version of Judaism, or you end up with something that's not even Jewish at the end of everything.
I think the stringencies of our religion, if you to follow them to Orthodox standards, and this is something that we have, the Chumraization of religion more recently is something that has taken it to the nth degree. But if you were to look at how we maintain our cultural identity, the more religious, certainly, both in the way that they look, they dress, the names they give their children, very often down to the language that they speak. So there are still parts of Salford where a first language is not necessarily going to be English, it's going to be Yiddish. and that's preserving a cultural heritage that has been passed down the line. But this has been our story throughout history, all the way from Egypt all the way through to now. The way that we maintain our otherness, if you like, and a distinctly separate set of values is by being strict on these things.
Correct. And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because Rav Hirsch, I was going to say this yesterday at Shalosh Shudas, I didn't get a chance. Not at Shalosh Shudas. We don't have Shalosh Shudas. Let me clarify for all those
Caught
who
you.
think we don't serve. Huh?
We caught you.
You caught me. Even if you catch me, you know that Ian Creek would not allow us to serve any food in the
I know that.
So during the time that used to be Shalosh Shudas time, where I would have said a Dvar Torah, I didn't have the chance yesterday to say it. But Rav Hirsch actually writes that one of the amazing things about the exile down to Egypt was the following. The Egyptians, for some reason, had a dislike of the Jewish people. And you read it in 2 weeks ago in the Sedra that Yosef was not able to sit together with the Egyptians because the Egyptians didn't like the Hebrews. They didn't sit together. They didn't break bread together with the Hebrews. And what Rav Hirsch points out, again, maybe looking at it with the hat, wearing the hat, or with the eyes, the vision of an 1850 or 1870 German rabbi who's looking at the reform and what's going on over there. He said, if the Jews had wanted to create a nation in Canaan, where they lived, or what was formerly Israel, they would have struggled, because at one point or another, a nation of 70 people, what ends up happening is you end up becoming assimilated and swallowed up by the host culture. The only way you don't become assimilated and swallowed up by the host culture is if, for whatever reason, the host culture decides to shun you aside and to not accept you. So in Egypt, they were not accepted. And because of, in Egypt, them not being accepted, therefore, they weren't allowed to, because they weren't accepted there, therefore, they were able to flourish, they were able to become what they became. So it's as you said, it's something that's really gone through the ages.
We've got some comments and questions coming in, which we'll try and address now. So Sharon Hood had said, personally, I felt sad seeing on Facebook some tables decorated with Santa faces. I could just about cope with the crackers, but Santa, and I believe I'm not narrow-minded. It's a hard image for some people to take.
It's a hard one. Look, we had a discussion a few weeks ago in the sermon also, and I mentioned, Adam Shogar said also that he had a Facebook group and somebody was showing off their Christmas tree. And a friend of his said, Jews shouldn't really be celebrating Christmas. It's not really our holiday. And this fellow got the amount of abuse he got from everybody around saying, you're so narrow-minded, and how could you? And people have a Christmas tree, and there's nothing wrong with Christmas trees. And again, that's the discussion we're in now. Is there something wrong with us having a Christmas tree or not?
It depends which side of that debate you stand on, because we're, when it comes to Hanukkah time, unashamedly, my Facebook feed beautifully is full of people lighting Hanukkah candles with pride and joy. In fact, one of the things that you must do with your Hanukkah candles is display them to the outside world.
Yeah.
And so really,
only Jews. That's the point. I think the point is that it's only Jews. I think what Sharon is upset about is not about non-Jews. The non-Jews can do whatever they want to. They should celebrate it to the fullest, and I hope that they do. I hope you take your holidays as seriously as we take our holidays and celebrate them to the full. I think what Sharon is saying, but she has Jewish friends who are decorating their tables with Santa, and that's where I think that's where she's having a hard time with it.
So David Cohen, good evening, David, one of our regular fans. David asks, isn't the Haredi dress a copy of Christians, what Christians would have worn, presumably, in that era of Poland?
It could be. I'm not really, I'm not familiar one way or another. I know some parts might be, and some parts not. I know that the shtreimel that they wear is interesting, because the Polish people made the Jews wear these foxtails on their head to make them look really make them look really bad. And so what the Jews did is they took those foxtails, turned it into shtreimel, and made it something that they wore, a dress of pride for their Shabbos. So sometimes that's happened this way or that way. Whether some of the elements of the way the Haredim dress are a copy of the Christians from 200-300 years ago. I'm not aware that it is or that it isn't, so I'll plead the fifth on that one, David. Sorry.
Fair enough. Chava Erlanger, good evening. Chava's got two-part question here. She believes that it's simple, that if she celebrates Christmas and Hanukkah, the likelihood is that her grandchildren will only do Christmas.
I think she's right. Sadly, I think she's right. Not because I'm upset that Chava's right. I'm sorry. Let me rephrase that. It's sad that what's going to happen is that in general the grandchildren will only celebrate Christmas. And I think part of it has to do with the nature of Judaism. Judaism is a very difficult religion, and unless you're in, and you really want to be in, then it's very easy for people to say, look, I just want out. I don't want anything to do with this. I don't want to have to go down 3 times a day. I don't want to have to have somebody imposing on me where I can eat or I cannot eat. I'm sure many of you have heard Elon. Have you heard of Elon Gold?
Yeah, sure.
So Elon Gold has a whole thing about. He's got this. I mean, he said it a few times. I'm sure you can hear him if you want to do. He's got a whole album on Spotify if you want to listen to it. It's on there for free. And how he speaks about the fact that Judaism, you couldn't write a commercial for Judaism. Do you want to deny yourself some of the most tasty foods in the world? Do you want to make sure that one day a week you don't get any work done whatsoever and just sit at home doing? Judaism is a hard one to keep, and so Chava's right. If you end up having Christmas and Hanukkah together, usually what ends up happening is people just dump out on the Hanukkah and end up with the Christmas. Sadly.
It's easier to go with the flow, isn't it, of what's going on around you. Kate Laurie asked a question, but if you don't mind, I think it's worth answering it again because we tackled this right at the beginning. But Kate asks, is it true that you're not supposed to learn Torah on Christmas Eve, Christmas evening, and why is that so?
So what we mentioned one opinion, or we mentioned two opinions. Actually, 2 or 3 things to be said about it. Number one, some say you shouldn't learn Christmas on Torah evening, and that's more the Hasidic side of things. They will not learn any Torah on Christmas Eve. Then there are those that say that you are allowed to, but you should do it in a way that's not dangerous, because going out in the olden days was very, very dangerous, especially on Christmas Eve. And then the Chassam Sofer, whom I mentioned earlier, but I forgot to say it. The Chassam Sofer says that what he used to do is he used to close the yeshiva early on the 24th, let everybody go and have a rest, and make them come back at 12 o'clock at night. And he said he felt that if all the Christians could go to midnight mass and could attend their services at 12 o'clock at night, it would look bad upon the Jewish people that everybody else is shluching. So therefore, he would have people specifically have a rest, and then whilst the non-Jews were having their mass, he would have a special learning seder, he would have a special learning session for everybody to show that we are just as dedicated as our non-Jewish neighbors. So that's the different opinions on learning on Christmas evening.
So Jane reminds us again that the tradition of the tree is actually taken from the original pagan traditions.
Asherah people.
Yeah. And Sharon agrees with her. And then Clive says
I think Sharon was agreeing, that came earlier. She was agreeing with my interpretation of her comment. That's what she wrote exactly.
Okay.
She was talking about her friends.
As long as she agrees. But Clive Moss-Barkley states that I think he means Queen Victoria's husband introduced Christmas trees from the UK from German pagan sources, which has stuck.
I don't know.
Still today.
I wouldn't say I know all the different rituals or how it happened or when it happened.
Yeah, so Kate asked that she thought it was to do with evil spirits, but so again, that's
what the Hasidim say. The Hasidim say it has to do with the evil spirits, which is why they don't learn on Christmas Eve, on the 24th into the 25th. There are many people that don't learn for that reason, but there are others that don't go along with this whole evil spirit thing, and they say you're still allowed to learn as long as you do it in a safe way.
So, Rabbi, we'll be going for almost an hour, so let's we'll round off. But in doing so, obviously, Christmas for a lot of people, this festive period for a lot of people has been extremely different to that the normally experienced in years that have come before, and this is all due to COVID. And in many ways, when Boris turned around 3 or 4 weeks ago and promised everybody from the different nations that they were going to guarantee a relaxation of the laws on Christmas. I know the instant reaction from a lot of Jewish people was, and also people of other faiths as well.
The Muslims really got it, because they, on the eve of Eid, 2 hours before Eid, they had the plug pulled on them. They had it worse than we did, I think.
They did, and so obviously what this is. Listen, we have to be mindful of the fact that intrinsically we are living in a Christian country, and that Christmas symbolizes for a lot of people not necessarily the religious elements of Christmas, but it's these other elements of Christmas that we've discussed this evening in terms of, that goodwill and
together, the goodwill, the family, all of that
celebration. So, Rabbi, I will hand over to you to summarize. I mean, it's difficult to draw a conclusion. I think the answer is largely that obviously we have to stick to our own traditions and try and resist as much as possible. But I'm going to hand over to you.
Well, there are two things that you mentioned. So before we summarize, I think to say that the fact that, that our non-Jewish Christian neighbors were able to celebrate their holiday, I think I would turn around and say, look, I'm happy for them that they were able to do that. This sort of thinking of like, we weren't allowed to, so how come they're allowed to? That's that feels almost childish, Daddy, you let him stay up till 9 o'clock. Why am I not allowed to stay up till 9 o'clock? That's what it sounds like to me. I think the question should rather be not why are they allowed to? The question needs to be, we'd also like to be given certain leniencies or leeway with our holidays. The problem is that we have that many, so I think we'd have to choose one. And I wonder even if if the government said, what, all Jews, you want to get together the first night Rosh Hashanah, you can get together first night Rosh Hashanah, or you want to get together first night Seder, you can get together first night Seder. I don't think that the government would be so. It would be so wrong for them to turn around and to say that, and maybe they would, but I think it would become almost impossible for them because there are so many different religions. And there's so many different people, and there's so many races and creeds that live in this country. We really are a very multicultural society that unless you say, look, this is the major religion of the country. I don't know what the percentage is. What is the percentage of Christians in this country? Is it not 80 or 85%?
It definitely makes up the majority. Yeah, absolutely.
It definitely well over 60 or 70%.
Yeah.
So then it makes sense for them to say, look, this is 70% of the country believe in this. 70, even if they don't believe in this, 70% of the country celebrates this. So I think we can give them a break. But for the 0.5% of the country that says, but what about our Rosh Hashanah? And you find another 0.5% of the country that says, what about our Kwanzaa, whatever else it is? So that is, I don't know if the government is able to do that. You can't always deal with every little splinter group within society and give everyone everything. You can, as they said, I think somebody told me many years ago in the rabbinate, if you do a good job most of the time to most of the people, you're doing all right. And I think that's the same with the government. There'll always be people that have a go at you, and there'll always be people that say you're not doing what you're supposed to. And part of dealing with people is going to be that you're not going to make everybody happy. That's just the way it is. So, I think I'm happy for them that they had their holidays. In a way, it's saddening that a lot of people in Tier 4 were not allowed to have it. And also, the issue of the fact that they went from 5 days to 1 day also was very upsetting for people. I understand that. As Jews, I think it's a day that we shouldn't really be celebrating that much because it's not really a Jewish day. Maybe we can say you'd like to celebrate the fact that we're more into world peace, that we're more into giving, that we want to give people a home, that we want to feed the poor, etc., etc. Those are things to celebrate. And I think that our world has become a better place over the years. You look back in the Middle Ages, the world was a really dark place. It was a difficult place to live in. It was a very violent place to live in. And we are living in a much, much better world. And Baruch Hashem, we are living in that better world. And the question then becomes, so if you live in that better world, you have to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu that we live in a better world? Absolutely. And can you say, maybe on a day like Christmas, and say, thank God Hashem that Christmas has become what it has become instead of what it used to be? Yeah, you can thank God for it. But I think once you start celebrating it, you're losing yourself slightly into the host culture that you're in. And it is a dangerous, slippery slope that leads in the wrong direction. And so therefore, it's something that I don't know if it's such a good idea.
Okay, well, that's a fantastic summary. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we'll see you again next week. We've got, I think, quite a packed schedule for the next few
Yeah, we've
weeks.
got 3 weeks of really great stuff coming up. Would you
Yeah,
do you want to put up that poster? You want to tell everybody what's going on the next 3 weeks?
yeah, I will quickly tell you. So next week we have there's going to be a panel that looks at how Jewish Manchester, so the Manchester Jewish community, how they handled COVID, and one of the most amazing things to have come out of COVID, really, if we can even say that, is that you have this this coming together of different organizations. And it's interesting because David Cohen over there in the comments, I mean, I'll leave you all to read that later, but it's a discussion that we had many weeks ago, right at the beginning of this week one. We discussed Garden Minyonim, and I think we got quite into the subject of that. So it's available online. Anybody can go back and have a look. There's comments over there. But what's interesting is you have this cross-community collaboration going on between Haredi groups and mainstream groups and fringe groups. Everybody has pulled together over the past few months to really deliver services to the Jewish community to keep them going through COVID. So I'd encourage any of you to tune in next week. We'll have people on there from the Friendship Circle, the Fed, the Herschel Wise Center, L'chaim Food Bank, who have been distributing an unbelievable amount of food to the local population. You wouldn't even believe it. You'll tune in next week and find out. So that's coming up next week. And that is on the 3rd. That's a panel discussion. On the 10th, we're going to be looking at halachic perspectives on medical issues. We've got a special guest that Dr. Sugar is arranging for us from London. He's an expert on medical halacha. And on the 17th of January, we will be talking to Marie van der Zyl from the Board of Deputies. We've actually got a one last request, which I'm going to put up on the screen over here. Jane asked everybody to pray for the Myers family in Whitefield. Fagi Bas Masha is in critical condition with COVID. So if everybody can remember her.
I just mention while we're at it, if there is anybody that has any other good ideas for guests that they want to have or topics they would like to discuss, could you get in touch either with myself or David? We've had a lot of organizations. This has been picking up a tremendous amount of traction, and we've had organizations coming to us, like the Board of Deputies, have actually come to David and said, "We'd love to be on your Sunday Night Live." We've actually also tried to contact the Chief Rabbi's office, and I'm hoping at one point or another. At the moment, they said no, but I'm hoping that if we push hard enough, at one point or another, they will acquiesce, so we can have the Chief Rabbi on here as well. But if any of you have good ideas for guests, or if any of you have good ideas for topics that you would like to have discussed, please come to us, either David or myself. It'd be great to be able to do these things. Sharon is asking how many people are watching these Sundays.
This is a great question. So when it's just us, and when it's just so for instance, sometimes we don't manage to publicize it well in advance, or we don't manage to get it out to all the other shuls. So we're guaranteed somewhere between 20 and 30 if it's just our regular crowd. And the numbers tend to soar when the other shuls are involved. We go from last week at some point we had about 75 people tuned in live on the night, and then actually in between last week and now over 1,500 people have watched some of our Sunday Night Lives, whether it's the one from last week or others. So we're reaching a wider audience, but of course, I think that this whole idea was conceived to bring content and to reach out and form connection with our shrubs community. I'm really glad that it's done that. And regardless of what you may think about it, whether it's good or whether it's bad, the fact that you all keep tuning in every week is testament to the fact that we probably should keep going with it.
Absolutely.
So, thank you very much, everybody. We'll see you again.
Thanks so much for joining us again.
See you soon.